just don't want anyone to miss the pertinent parts. And this is being recorded. I just want to let everyone know right now that it was recording at the start whenever you first came in. And just a friendly reminder that this webinar is set up today. All the guests are going to be muted, and there will be a Q&A. There's a Q&A section at the top of your screen of your Teams window, and you should be able to click on that and type in a question. We'll do our very best to answer questions as we go through. If we are not able to answer that question in real time, we will answer it during the Q&A section of this webinar. Um, Today's webinar, we're not going to be talking a lot about the specific, like individualized client data. So if you're having issues with like client data and individual that you're working with, or project setup situations, or getting onboarded into HMIS, that is not the purpose of today's conversation. So I will ask that if you have those types of questions, please email us at hmissupport@openingdoorsnwfl.org. And also the materials from today's webinar and today's recording will be made available to you on Opening Doors website. And thank you for attending today. As a special treat, you're going to get this to you sent by Ms. Serene or myself with all of the materials that are also a part of this webinar. So it seems like we may be able to get started here now. And Ms. Schultz, I just want to let you know that we are going to have someone reaching out to you to help you with the troubleshooting, and just stand by. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to let you see me briefly. So we're just going to get started with the agenda. Today's agenda is an overview of HMIS. So we're going to go over a brief history and the use of HMIS, and we're going to talk about what are user-facing elements and what are the data standards. Then we're going to break into specifically what is being updated about the 2024 HMIS data standards. Some of these data standards will impact every single end user in the HMIS. Others will only impact a specific project type or a specific program. So depending on your funder and the project type, you may have different questions that will not be asked by any other organization as a part of the Homeless Management Information System. Then we'll talk about some reporting impacts that the fiscal year 2024 data standards update will cause or impact, and then we will have the Q&A section. So a brief history of HMIS. So HMIS's data standards were published first in 2024. They were published by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was a charge given to HUD by the United States of America's Congress. So pretty much they were told that because we're giving federal funding to these different organizations across the nation, that you need to start having them to collect client level data. And we need to start seeing some reports on the people that you serve and how you utilize the funds that we award to these communities. So what that required is that continuums of care, which all of this started kind of being birthed at the same time. The concept of continuums of care in homeless management information systems pretty much started being birthed in about the 1980s, late 1980s, and then it just started to grow from there. But then it became a mandate in 2004, and so this required that COCs across the nation use a homeless management information system. And then it also required that the homeless management information system follow specific HUD HMIS data and technical standards. So what is HMIS? So in layman's terms, it is simply just a local database. It's a local database where we collectively put the client level data on the individuals that we serve that are unsheltered, so they're homeless, or they are at risk of experiencing homelessness. So pretty much you're basically telling the story about how you deliver supportive services and housing to the people that you serve in your organization. Whether you are a federally funded partner or you're not. You are a part of a homeless response system, so we all work together. And we have to understand as users that even if you're not federally funded or you don't receive state grants that mandate that you use the HMIS, that your data impacts the federally funded programs. So we have to be mindful, and that is the reason why we're going to this training today. So let's give some more context. All communities have to select an HMIS software solution. So for our community, our software solution is Service Point. There are other vendors that are out there, such as Client Track and Clarity, um, but WellSky's Community Services or Service Point is the most widely used HMIS software system in the country, including Puerto Rico. So there's about 52 to 54% of COCs that are active that are actually using Service Point. With our implementation, we are a 13 continuum of care implementation. We're the second largest regional implementation. So the other regional implementation is across multiple states through ICA Alliance, and we are Promise SC. So we are the second regional implementation in the United States of America. And we have 13 communities for the full state of Alabama and the four communities in the panhandle of Florida. So from Escarosa all the way to Tallahassee, Leon, which is the Big Bend area. So what I also want to let you know about our makeup is that the data standards that we put into the system were constructed and derived by a collaborative body. That collaborative body is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Department of Health and Human Services. So it is heavily driven towards data collection for specific federal programs, but HUD is very interested in knowing, well, for those individuals or organizations that are advocating and serving people who are homeless or who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, how are you a part of your homeless response system in your local community? So their expectation is, regardless of you receiving federal dollars or not, that you collect the same information as the federally funded programs that are using the HMIS, because we all impact one another. So just think of this group as the collaborative body that came up with the HMIS data and technical standards. They had to meet years and years of meetings, including with HIPAA, to actually design the HMIS and what questions that are asked, and so that we can report on the people that we serve. Okay, so the use of HMIS data. So I'm going to give you the rougher version of how HMIS data is used, and then I'm going to give you my heartfelt spiel on how we use HMIS data. So HMIS data is utilized by Congress. Basically says, I'm going to give funding to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The VA has their own pot of funding. HHS has their own pot of funding because they have dedicated homeless projects or dedicated homeless programs that they have said, I have a commitment to preventing and ending homelessness. And so they gave funding to some type of managing entity or some type of body. For our community, when it comes to dollars that are through HUD, which is the largest award, they award the most homeless dollars of any body to communities. They basically say they're going to give funding to continuum of care. And so for our community, the continuum of care is for the lead agency is Opening Doors. So Opening Doors' responsibility at that point is to report or require that itself uses the HMIS system, and that those agencies that receive HHS dollars, VA dollars, that they are, if they're required to enter data to HMIS, that we reach out to those community partners and help them to get onboarded, that we help them to report their data successfully, that we help provide technical assistance for those agencies. And then also for those parties that are interested in joining the HMIS, because you're touching the unsheltered population or those who are at risk of experiencing homelessness, that we're helping you also be a part of the homeless response system to tell our full community story on how we help people. Then from Service Point, we all do different types of reporting, whether you are an ESG recipient, COC recipient, RI, SSVF, there's different reports that have to be downloaded or in CSV format from the HMIS and uploaded into something. For RI, that's a RI repository. For SSVF, they have an SSVF repository. For COC and ESG, we upload things into the SAGE repository or into HDX. There's lots of reports that go into HDX, such as our PIT, our HIC, our system performance measures, and our longitudinal statistical analysis. A lot of acronyms. I know that those don't seem important to you, but all of these reports help us to tell our community story and how we are moving the needle on homelessness and also preventing people from moving and slipping into homelessness. So after we submit all of these annual, quarterly, whatever reports, specifically to our homeless response system with PIT, HIC, LSA, it all comes out into something that's called the AHAR, or the Annual Homelessness Assessment Report. That report is returned back to Congress, and that is how Congress then looks at the trends that are happening within your community, and they say, okay, this community needs more dollars to stand up programs that help people who are exiting an institution, or that are DJJ involved, or youth aging out of foster care. So that is how Congress then passes funding, whether it's to HUD, to HHS, to VA, to say, hey, you need to stand up more programs under this umbrella. Let's start that cycle again. So the heartfelt reason of how we use HMIS data is to tell the story of the people that we serve, whether it's a couple that belongs to the LGBTQ community, we tell their story. Someone that is a single adult that's unsheltered, chronically homeless, a youth that's aging out of foster care, the elderly, blue-collar workers. So people who belong to marginalized and underserved populations. Our goal is to tell their story of how their life was changed. And that last picture on the very bottom in the middle is us as a community coming together through diversity, through inclusivity, through belonging, through equity, to change the lives of people that we serve and walk alongside them as advocates. Not to tell them what to do, but to teach and to advocate on their behalf, and to help them to make the decision to end their homelessness, or to help them to learn skills to prevent them from becoming homeless. Give me just a moment. IT heard my microphone was making static, and so they came back here to help me. Is there static right now? They're still static. I'm so sorry, everyone. Is there static right now? Oh, terrible. I'm so sorry. It's still ongoing? Don't know where it's coming from. Is it bad where we cannot keep going forward? It's not bad where we need to stop. Okay. We will try to continue to persevere. Thank you everyone for trying to be patient with me. I greatly appreciate that. So user-facing data elements. User-facing data elements are the data elements that will have a direct impact on you. It is basically what are you going to be required to do in the HMIS system, and it could potentially impact reporting. So that's the reason why we're going over those data standard changes and also how it's going to impact reporting in the specific reports that it impacts. So just a friendly reminder that the data elements are updated on October 1, 2023. However, we have a very special thing that we're doing, and we'll talk about that a little later on in this webinar. But just know that there's going to be impacts to you directly as users, and you're going to have some reporting impacts possibly. And we're going to help you do that. HUD is very aware that with data standard changes, that there is the potential for there to be reporting impacts, so they try to do a lot to mitigate that between the vendor and the HMIS lead and the different users. So HMIS data standards. HMIS data standards are data collection requirements established by HUD, HHS, and the VA. So the data standards define how our community's homeless response system works and how it operates, and it also defines who we are as a homeless response system. How many people are we helping to prevent from becoming homeless for the first time? How many people are we helping to rehouse quickly or to, house off of the streets who are chronically homeless quickly? So it's looking at how should we be defined as a community by the work that we do, correct? So that's what the HMIS data standards help us to do, is tell that story. So data element structure. The first thing that we're going to go over today is about the project descriptor data elements. We are only going to go over those things that are going to impact you, your organization, or you at the individualized user level. So specifically with project descriptor data elements, this is basically how myself and my team as the HMIS lead, how do we set up your project to ensure that you're collecting the data the right way, and is your project labeled the right way? So then when you do all your federal reporting, or if we report on your project as a part of the reports that go up to Congress, is everything correct? Is the story being told correctly? Are we saying what activities you're doing correctly? Then we're going to talk about the universal data elements briefly, just items that are changing within there and how they're changing. We're going to also talk about program-specific data elements, which include the HUD verifications or the sub-assessments within the HMIS system. And we're also going to talk about some federal partner-specific data elements that are having some updates. So the first thing to know about HMIS data standards is it outlines data collection instruction. So how is data collected, and at what periods of time should the data be collected? So data in the HMIS is collected in phases. And so those phases are assessments performed at the project enrollment and relevant data that is collected over time. So HMIS collection points include the project start or entry, project update, or you may hear me use interim updates, project annual assessments, project exits, and project post exits. Now, depending on who your program funder is, they have said in your program manual that you have to collect certain elements at specific HMIS data collection points. We're going to go over that. There's a chart as a part of this that talks about some of these data elements and how you need to collect that information. You will also get access to the program manual specific to your program. So if you're SSVF, your team's going to be receiving the VA program manual. If you're HUD-VASH, you're going to be receiving the HUD-VASH program manual. If you're RIDE, the RIDE program manual. High key recommendation, read the manual. So the new project descriptor data elements that I'm going to highlight. So we have our standard data elements such as coordinated entry, supported services only, emergency shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, homeless prevention. But when you look at permanent housing for rapid rehousing, HUD is doing something new. They recognize that different projects are possibly only serving people with supportive services, or they're serving them with housing with or without services. So HUD has made what's called a subtype for the rapid rehousing projects. And they want to know if the rapid rehousing project is only providing services only, such as with ESG, a project can only provide credit repair and that's the only thing that they provide. Or they want to know if the project is providing housing only or housing with services. So those are going to be subtypes that are going to be available for us to report on to HUD moving forward so that they can understand how that project's activities are functioning in the community. There's also another new project descriptor data element where we have to basically say, is your project participating in the HMIS system or not? HMIS participation is defined as the project is entering data in the HMIS. So if the project's not entering data and they're read only, then your project is set to not participating. That means HUD may not look at the data as a part of major federal reporting because you're not entering any data, which makes sense, correct? And then HUD wants to know if there are victim service providers in our community, then is the victim service provider using a comparable database and submitting aggregate reports to the HMIS lead? So we've all talked about over meetings over the last courses, maybe the last 3 to 4 months, that victim service providers cannot use RCOC's HMIS system, correct? So they have to use what's called the HMIS comparable system. We do have a victim service provider in our community that actually does use a HUD mandated HMIS comparable database, and they do provide information for us. So we do have a victim service provider that has been successful at doing that. And so they're set up, they have a project set up in the HMIS, but we just set it to comparable database participating, and so HUD doesn't expect there to be data going into our system, but they do expect for us to be keeping track of aggregate reports, to look at the counts of the number of people that they serve by demographic and things of that way. Also, coordinated entry participation. So this is also a new project element, a project descriptor data element. So if a project is saying that they're participating in coordinated entry, or they're saying that we're a coordinated entry access point, then they had they have to now be officially labeled as that in the HMIS system. And we also have to say, in what way is this project participating in coordinated entry? Are they processing prevention referrals? Are they helping people to gather documentation, providing supportive services? Are they accepting referrals from the coordinated entry for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing? So this specifically impacts a lot of the ESG. Would that be possible to take a short break from this? Can you hear me now without there being any static?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Hallelujah.
Thank you. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. And thank you, Ben, for your recommendation. You are an IT guru. Okay, so I'm going to start with the coordinated entry participation again. Please take photos of this, because if you're saying you're participating in coordinated entry, or if you're COC funded project or ESG funded project, specifically ESG and COC funded projects have to participate in coordinated entry. So your labels are going to be turned on in October, on October 1. So we're going to have to start having conversations about like what this looks like. I'll talk to your program leads to kind of understand what your interface is with coordinated entry, and then we'll get everything programmed the right way. All right, so I dumped every single universal data element on here because there are new people on this call, right, that have never experienced HMIS or spend some time since they experienced HMIS, so they're like a returning user. So basically what I've done is I've broken down what the element is, what the description is, and who in the household does the information have to be collected on, and when does it have to be collected. This is very difficult to get in a very user-friendly way without me actually going in the HMIS. And since the HMIS has not been updated to show you what the new changes are, we've had to do it this way. However, our goal is to come back and do short snippet videos on the new data standards changes and actually illuminate those new structures within the system and what it looks like. So specifically to this, I really just want to hone in on race and ethnicity, first of all. So race and ethnicity has been combined. That data element has changed to where users will be able to select multiple responses for the client response. So you will be able to select all 7 race ethnicity options there. I know. Now, race and ethnicity is based on how a person identifies. It's not based on like how us as a user, what we think someone looks like or observation. It's based on how does a client self-report to us. And cultural identity is super important. It makes up who we are, how we speak, how we carry ourselves, how we behave. So this is an opportunity for people to tell us how do they want to be seen. What is their personal opinion of themselves? So the client does not have to report more than one race. And race and ethnicity, both fields can be selected. So there's no longer a non-Hispanic, Latina, Latino. There's only Hispanic, Latina, Latino. So um, what you want to do is have this conversation with the client and just ask them, based on these options here, and read the options out to them, how do you identify? What you don't want to do is select a race or ethnic group or ethnic identity, race or ethnic identity, and then select client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer, and data not collected. You can't select those two options at the same time because that will cause a error because it doesn't make sense, right, to the system logic. So basically, if a client says, I do identify as a particular race, you can't say, I refuse to answer or don't know later on and put them together. So when you enter in client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer, and data not collected, uh, that does not replace the race and ethnicity field. All that does is says, hey, this is missing race and ethnicity information, but it doesn't replace that you, you don't have a race and ethnicity identified for this individual. So over time, hopefully, as the person is engaged with your staff at your organization or goes through maybe interdisciplinary teams through the continuum, maybe they'll be comfortable with divulging that information and basically saying, this is how I identify. And the unique thing about this is that a client can say, I only want this part of my data to, be seen by certain parties. Um, However, race and ethnicity, that is not the case. However, when we get to gender identity, it is, which I'll go over here briefly. So with race and ethnicity, it's like they either need to tell us how they identify, or they can basically say, I prefer not to answer. Now, when it comes to gender, there's a change. So the change that is in place is you're going to be able to select multiple responses for the client response. You're going to have 7 options. And the unique data elements that you see here are that uh, we're now looking at age as being a part of how gender identity plays a role. So if someone identifies as a woman or a girl, if an individual identifies as having a culturally specific identity, such as Two-Spirit, or if they identify as transgender, non-binary, questioning, or different identity. So there's actually an additional text box so that if someone says that they belong to a different identity, you can record that information. So again, this response is also about the client self-report or self-identification. The client does not have to report more than one gender. If the client identifies as more than one gender, both fields can be selected. You just can't select client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer, and data not collected at the same time as you select a specific gender identity. So what we have to understand is that people have autonomy, right? They have the right to identify how they want to be identified, and that they have the right to say how do they want their data to be shared. So there are some individuals who are not going to be forthcoming about their gender identity because of the things that they've experienced, whether it's because it's for their safety or because they've had a negative experience with, different organizations, or if they've had, if they're just afraid for some particular reason. So, uh, what we want to do is to advocate, right, as users. Our job is to say, hey, I understand that this is going to be a sensitive question. I would like to ask you this question. Based on the options that we have here, name out those options to the individual. How do you identify? HUD has done a great job with basically giving us examples on how to answer this question. And actually, in the notes field of this presentation, I actually have a lot of that detail there, but it's also as a part of the manuals that you're going to get. Okay, so basically, we have to advocate for the client and let them know that, let's say in this system they're already existing in the HMIS and they have had, the individual has had a gender identity change, right? It is our responsibility to update that gender identity change, but we need to tell the client the impacts that that would have. So we have a shared HMIS implementation. The client has the right to say, I don't want my gender identity to be shared across the implementation. They can share it to only one project. So that would be communication between your organization and the HMIS lead to ensure that if the client says, I don't want my gender identity to be shared past this particular organization, there needs to be a discussion on how to lock that individual's file so that their gender identity is not shared. And that's in the program manual. That's per the program manual. That is the instruction. So I'm just going by the book. Universal data elements. So we're going to continue forward and we're going to talk about destination. Destination has had changes and so has prior living situation. Now, when it comes to destination and prior living situation, they all have a chart that is the same, which is called the Living Situations Options Chart, or Appendix A. It's a part of your manual. I believe it's usually the last 1 to 2 pages of each manual. So become very familiar with Appendix A, or the Living Situations Options Chart, because it's going to help you to identify the living situation response for a lot of the fields in the HMIS. I believe this Appendix A impacts 4 different data response fields in the HMIS system. Okay, so you need to become very familiar with it and what it says and how it is explained. So with the destination responses, there has been a change in the headers. So before, everyone, you might have noticed that the temporary housing situation and the permanent housing situation were together, right? Within the living situation, the prior living situation, current living situation fields, or the destination fields. Well, what HUD did was HUD said, we're going to separate that because we need to differentiate what was a temporary housing situation versus a permanent housing situation. So now, instead of there being only 4 headers, there are 5 within the field, the boxes. And so there's homeless situations, which will have your 3 customary homeless situations, place not meant for human habitation, emergency shelter, and safe havens, and then your institutional situations, temporary housing situations, permanent housing, and other. This also impacts your prior living situation data fields. So it impacts how this information is going to be collected. And the change with this is so complex, I actually had to get visualizations involved so that you can see what it looks like. Again, we are going to have to come back and do some type of recording about how this changes, because you have to see it to believe it, right? You have to use it or you lose it. So with the prior living situation, what HUD did was they really ironed out how they want to look at the prior living situation response fields. And basically, they wanted it to be very clear. If a person was in a homeless situation, that they can identify if the client was chronically homeless or not, or is the client homeless or not. What they also did was, for all other project types, as you can see here that are listed, what they wanted to know is, was the client at risk of homeless? Is the client currently homeless? Or is the client having a situation that they've reported that is can't be possible, right? So this has helped them to iron things out even better. So here's some visualizations on what this looks like. I did some tests out of the training site, and basically I'm just going to walk you through what this looks like. So if a person is in a homeless situation, right, logically, their homeless situation needs to be able to say, okay, they're in a homeless situation. It was within a certain length of time. The approximate date that their homelessness experience started has to make sense and be logical with the next two questions, which are the number of times the client has been homeless in the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the last 3 years, and that the total number of months homeless in the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the last 3 years. Because what the system does, it flags when these fields don't make sense. So historically, if the client has been screened and they've reported being homeless in the last 3 years, different numbers of times and different approximate dates that their homeless experience occurred, because now the question is, when did this episode of homelessness occur? It's about the individual episode. It's not about like their entire length of time. It's about, well, when did this episode of homelessness start? That's how that approximate date homelessness started is going to be asked moving forward. And so it's looking at more so now, does the system logic make sense? Is the way the individual is answering this question make sense? So we're going to have to really train up our case management skills and kind of helping the customer to get down to what is happening now as of this current episode. So based on how this question is answered here, this individual is in emergency shelter. They were there less than 90 days. If you look at the approximate date that homelessness was reported, they've been there about 71 days. And they don't have any history in the HMIS, so this is their first time. And so they've been homeless about a total of 2 months. So systematically, this is logical. That's what this is showing. With the institutional situations, HUD is looking at, well, did the client exit the institution after staying for 90 days and now they're homeless? Or did the client exit the institution after 90 days and they're not homeless now, right? They're still either in that situation or they've not returned to homelessness. And that's what these two examples show you. So if a person is not homeless right now, the conditional questions, the additional conditional questions that you see there are not going to populate. Okay? So if the client is still in their institutionalization situation or institution, then they won't have the conditional questions populate. Okay? So that is how you tell the difference between what's happening in the system and understanding how HUD is wanting to identify what is happening with the individual's current episode, with our client's episode of homelessness. Then with temporary situations, HUD is looking at, okay, if a person is in a temporary situation, right, they're staying with a friend or family member or a hotel, motel paid for out of their own dollars, not covered by a nonprofit or federal grant or a church or any entity like that, then were they staying there for 1 week or more or 1 week or less? If they've been there less than a week, HUD is trying to see, okay, well, were they homeless before then, right? Were they unsheltered? Were they in an emergency shelter? Were they in a safe haven? If not, then HUD is saying, okay, well, they're not in category 1 homeless. That's what this is saying. They're in homelessness, but not in category 1 unsheltered homelessness. And then with permanent housing situations, HUD's logic on this is, okay, Does the client's response conflict with HMIS logic? That's really what it boils down to. So if the client is reporting being in a rental, well, have they been in the rental? If they said, okay, last night I was in the rental, and then they say, well, I stayed there less than 7 nights, and before that I wasn't in the streets or emergency shelter or safe haven, then obviously the client may have some risks. They might be at risk for eviction, um, or for non-payment of rent, or the landlord has decided they're not going to rent to them anymore. Whatever the case is, they're at risk, not experiencing active homelessness. For clients who are staying or living in a friend's room or apartment, this example is showing, okay, this person has been staying with a friend or a family member for 90 days or more, but less than a year, and they didn't stay in an unsheltered situation for in that situation for less than 7 nights. And so because of that, then the client obviously might be at risk of homelessness. They're not unsheltered, they're at risk of homelessness. This is what this logic is looking at. Okay, so program-specific data elements. Again, this is one of those data elements that we're going to hone in on, which is called the current living situation. Current living situation is actually what replaced the, I don't know how long people have been using HMIS. It replaced contact date or date of contact. It depends on what system you are in. Um, but current living situation replaced the contact date or date of contact. And so this is an occurrence point question. This is us basically keeping track of the client's current living situation and how this field helps the homeless response system is. It helps us to, it's another way for us to identify episodes or ongoing homelessness. It helps us to finally be able to identify if someone meets the chronic homeless definition when paired with what happens in the prior living situation fields in the disabling conditions sub-assessment, okay? So current living situation, if you're updating this and you've been working with a client for 12 calendar months and you have 12 individual contacts on the current living situation sub-assessment, you are helping our COC PSH team in the COC to be able to identify if someone's chronically homeless or not. And this field has to be entered in by all projects, by the way, regardless of funder. It is a required field for no matter if you're non-federally funded or you're federally funded. This is a mandated field. So this basically what HUD has done with this field. They're saying, okay, all HMIS participating agencies entering data, you are responsible for helping the COC as a whole to identify who's homeless, who's chronically homeless, who's housed, are they staying housed consistently. It also helps us with what's called the system performance measures for recidivism, and if an individual or family has been housed for 12 calendar months or however long they've been housed. So the current living situation is super important to our continuum, and so it's really important that we answer the current living situation. So this is what it looks like. The current living situation sub-assessment, it kind of looks like the income sub-assessments, except it doesn't have a HUD verification on it. It just has a magnifying glass. You don't want to click add. Please don't click add. Always click the magnifying glass. Okay. Once your sub-assessment opens up, the questions that are super important for you to be aware of within the sub-assessment is the start date automatically populates. The information date is how we track the contacts. That's how HUD is tracking the contacts. And then the current living situation is a drop down. It is based on the living situations options or that Appendix A form. So the living situations will match up to there. And then if other, you can write it in what the individual or family or head of household of the family describes. And then the living situation verified by is actually going to be your project. It's going to be whatever program that you're enrolling them in and recording the current living situation. It is that project that is verifying this person's living situation. And then you want to answer, especially for those families who are in temporary housing, not families only, but individuals and families that are in temporary housing situations or permanent housing situations. Is the client going to have to leave their current living situation within 14 days? Because if they're in that situation, this is helping us to identify the need for homeless prevention services, correct? To try to prevent an eviction or to try to ensure that the family or individual does not return to homelessness in an emergency shelter or in a place not meant for human habitation. So if that answer to is the client going to have to leave their current living situation within 14 days is yes, then you have to answer the subsequent 4 questions that come below. And then if the client is in just a situation where you need to record details about their location, such as, okay, inadequate housing, roof leakage, or if it's street outreach, you could say, well, what are the cross streets that you engage with the individual? And it's basically a way for us to have location details about what's happening with the client's either housing situation or unsheltered situation. Program specific data elements, these are all important. Everyone does not enter these fields. The date of engagement is mostly utilized by RI for street outreach, for ESG for street outreach, and it's also if there is a COC street outreach project, it's usually utilized, but they're not, we don't have a COC street outreach project. So it's basically any time, it's the time in which the client basically says, I'm ready to end my homelessness, I'm ready to actively start a case plan to move to permanent housing. That is when date of engagement is to be triggered, which means it is to be entered in the HMIS. And it is particularly on the engagement date, which is why you see it not only on the project start page, but you also see it on the interim update page. And it is to be collected on all heads of household and all adults in a particular household. And you have to ensure once the date of engagement is actually applied in the system, all your universal data elements and all program specific data elements related to your program has to be complete at that point in time. Because once you activate that date of engagement, HUD turns on another trigger that says we are expecting to see a full CCAS or coordinated and centralized assessment completed on that client. So you have to be very mindful about adding that date of engagement because it can really pull down your data quality if you don't have the UDEs and the PSDEs or universal data elements or program specific data elements completed at the point in time that you apply that date. The coordinated entry assessment and coordinated entry event, that is dependent on how our homeless response system determines what our coordinated entry is going to look like. There are certain projects that are mandated to participate in coordinated entry. So please make sure that you read your HMIS manual that is going to be delivered to you because it's going to tell you if you are COC and ESG, you're required. It's a HUD initiative, so you have to do it. So HUD COC, HUD ESG projects, you have to do it. I have seen some RI has been pulled in to coordinated entry. So please make sure that you read that part of the manual to identify if you had to participate or not. And with the coordinated entry assessment and coordinated entry events, this is basically about what is the assessment, what type of assessment was completed, was the client added on to a prioritization list or not. That is what this is looking at. And with the coordinated entry event, it's looking at, okay, did the client get a referral to a street outreach program? Did they get a referral to a housing program? What was the date of result? What was the outcome? So HUD is really now starting to move towards what they like to call final rule in having communities really report on their coordinated entry process and so that they can understand what is our flow, our workflow for moving people through the homeless response system. That is why these coordinated entry elements are super important. So the main things that make up the coordinated entry elements are the current living situation, the coordinated entry assessment, sub-assessment, and the coordinated entry event. So, and we're going to have a follow-up training on this because this is a lot for me to be dumping on, agencies that have probably not even experienced these data elements before. So now we're going to talk about those federally partner agencies that are receiving federal program funds through HUD, COC, and ESG. So a new data field for HUD, COC, and ESG, the moving on assistance provided is specific to HUD, COC permanent supportive housing projects, okay? So if you are a HUD, COC, PSH project, the moving on assistance provided data element is for you. Please make it your friend. What HUD is wanting to know is what type of moving on assistance and what type is this permanent supportive housing project providing to the permanent supportive housing participants. They're wanting to know at any given time, at whatever occurrence point that you're giving some type of moving on assistance. This is like supportive services, right? You need to track those supportive services at the occurrence point, and it needs to be tracked on the head of household. That is what this is saying. Your program manual will explain that even more in detail, and I will work alongside you to become familiar with this. Translation assistance needed. Translation assistance needed is required for ESG and CLC. With ESG and CLC, what they're wanting to know is, did the client need translation services, and was it offered to them? Did we offer the services to the individual regardless of their project type? So they're now requiring us to enter that information into the HMIS system and report on it. Now we're going to talk about HHS RI. With HHS RI, there was a minor change. What HHS decided to do with RI was they just wanted to change some language. They wanted to change the RI service connections label from mother to client person who gave birth. Instead of just having mother, they wanted to be in alignment with how people identify nationally, and said, I would prefer if we have something that said in the system, client, person who gave birth. Same thing with the next data field and how the naming convention or the label within the HMIS was changed. They changed the project completion status in counseling and changed the label within it from youth to client, because what HUD did was they did like a whole census of people who are unsheltered or who had persons with lived experience, and basically they took their feedback to determine how they should change the data elements, and this is the ending results. VA had some changes like this as well at the recommendation of VA providers and the unsheltered program participants and people with lived experience as well. And now we're going to get to that. So the VA probably had the bulk of changes in the HMIS system than any other project. They've been working very hard at really looking at how to collect data better to make sure that data that is collected is done in a equitable way, inclusive and diverse way. And this is a good direction to go in because it brings a person with lived experience or a person that's actively experiencing homeless back into the fold and having them be a part of the decision-making process for communities, and helps for us to better speak and engage with people that are experiencing homelessness. And so what happened with the data elements for the VA is They had a lot of naming convention changes. They also updated some response fields, and so we're going to go through that. So basically, Space Force as a military branch was added to the Veterans Information dropdown. And what HUD also did was, not HUD, I'm so sorry, VA and asked for HUD to do this, and so they made it so. Um, VA said, all right, we want to change subsidy to add shallow subsidy. So you all have been doing shallow subsidy for a while now. Very familiar, y'all have been doing it for a while. So finally, they're updating it so we don't have to do it manually in the system. And they also updated some of the naming conventions, such as the data financial assistance have been changed to start data financial assistance. And then they added options for landlord and tenant incentives. And then they added an end date of financial assistance so you can keep track. And that's probably going to be the way that that reads. It's probably going to look like a sub assessment, just to let you know. Okay. It's going to look like your HUD verifications, the way that that reads. Um, Percentage of AMI. So they also updated your response fields because they kind of had it very limited in how you can respond to see, what the income threshold of the veteran was. So they have flushed that out even further. So it gave you more response categories as well for the AMI eligibility. Because before, I don't even think they were reporting past like 50%. And so now they've gone up to 80% for you. The last permanent address will be retired, so you will no longer see that in the HMIS system. If it's there, once we get our rebuild done, then we'll put in a work ticket so that they can take that out for us, okay? But we've already got our work ticket in place, so it should be coming out before we even get updated. So there's also some wording changes in the HP targeting criteria. So they changed history of literal homelessness to past experience of homelessness. They also changed the head of household is not a current householder to head of household is not a current leaseholder or renter of unit. Same thing with the head of household, never been a leaseholder, changed to head of household, never been a leaseholder, renter, or of unit. And single parent with the minor children was changed to single parent guardian household with minor children. So this was to help with your SSVF HP targeting criteria for your scoring of your priority score. So reporting impacts. Reporting impacts are going to be specific to mostly SSVF repository, RI repository, ESG, HUD COC, and coordinated entry. Okay? So with RI, you should use, and all of us should be doing this. If you're doing reporting in the HMIS system, you should be using the data quality framework to check your data quality at least weekly. The HMIS lead will continue to email you targeted data quality reports weekly as well so that you can hone in on specific data quality errors. And then this will help you with preparing your export reports. So for RIE specifically, you have already been updated for the RIE reports to the 2024 data standards back in June. So you've been getting a hashed CSV file and doing your reporting under the 2024 data standards. So, and all of our uploads for all of our RIE projects have been successful for our community. So that's a win for our community in reporting our runaway homeless youth data. Yay. SSVF. SSVF also did a great job. It was a very quick and seamless process with getting the last repository completed. Just know that there is another repository upload that is upcoming because I believe you're ending your fiscal year contract, right? So what you want to do is to ensure that your submission takes place no later than, I would high key recommend September 29th. I know that the SSVF repository is going to be open maybe between like October 3rd, the week of October 3rd too. But because of our data standards update, the way that it's going to happen on October 1/October 2nd, because it's going to be touch or go, we don't want your report to not be accepted because they're only accepting it under the 2022 standards. They're not going to be accepting it under the 2024 standards until later on. Awesome. So just be mindful of that. HUD CLC, ESG, and coordinated entry for your reporting. We're all right now in the process of doing SAGE, HMIS repository. So we need to all make sure that we complete our download and upload into SAGE by September 29th, September 28th. I'm so sorry, because all of us, I believe, are ending our contracts as well. And we're supposed to be reporting, I believe, by September 28th. So let's make sure that we get that done. I believe there is one of these reports, and I believe it's the coordinated entry, which is about 30 days behind. It doesn't report until the end of October. So the coordinated entry report will be submitted for the community in October under the 2024 data standards. So just be mindful of these windows. We don't want anyone to have their reporting impacted and not have a successful upload. So we just need to be very mindful of this. And I'll send some friendly reminders just to make sure that we stay plugged in. So what is next? So Promise SC, which is our HMIS implementation, will update all of our assessments for all of the federal partner programs to the 2024 data standards on October 2nd, 2023. The reason why this was decided, this was a conversation between WellSky, since we're regional and we're going to have to change 13 communities all in one day. They're not going to be able to do it on a Sunday. So they said, we'll do it on that Monday morning, 4 in the morning. Again, this could cause some impacts. It will allow us to correct data quickly if there are any data errors that occur once the change happens. Our work ticket is already on the desk of the vendor WellSky, and they are waiting to pull the trigger on October 2nd. And just know that the naming convention on all of the assessments will have the 2024 year in it. So when you're looking at your project assessments, they all will say 2024 in the title somewhere. So that you can make sure that you're using the right assessment. If you notice that your assessment doesn't have the 2024 naming convention at the end, then notify us so that we can work with the vendor to get that information corrected. So I have taken the liberty in adding on this presentation all of the program manuals for the different federal partners. Now, I know we have some basic providers here or read-only providers. The rule of thumb for HUD is that you utilize the ESG HMIS program manual by your project type if you're doing data entry, because at least that would keep you entering the minimum data elements that are required for the HMIS system to run effectively. So all the program manuals are here. I do know the different agencies and what grants that you have based on your labels in the HMIS system from when you onboarded. So I will be sending this to your teams. This is homework. Make sure that you read over it. You can definitely revisit it, and we will do trainings on this periodically if we see any like major errors. It will usually give those trainings probably to the leads of your organization. It's like a train the trainer approach, so that staff is not all pulled out to go through these things. Any questions right now? You can use the Q&A. I didn't see any questions come through the Q&A other than my phone issues, which I apologize for. No questions, no raised hands. Awesome. Okay, so if there's no questions, I would love for everyone to have a great day, and we are done before 11 a.m. That is awesome. 11 minutes to spare. All right, you folks have a wonderful day. Just remember that we're going to be sending you this recording and all of the content that we can about what we went over today. And please reach out to HMIS support at Opening Doors NWFL.org if you have any questions, and my team will be glad to help you through anything. So have a wonderful day.